we are excited to have the rabbi teach us a little bit more about that Jewish holiday. Thank you, Rabbi Mike Weinstein.
Thank you. First and foremost, wow, that's hot. Well, we'll turn that down just a little bit. Should I keep talking? I'm certain they can hear me in the sanctuary right now, can't they? So first and foremost, thank you so much for having me to come and spend time with you all. This is not my first time with you, and it feels like home here a little bit, so thank you that. Thank you for the warm welcome. A little side note of history. Where do I go with it? So when I was in rabbinical school, I wrote my rabbinic thesis on what's called the Rabbi's Manual. And Rabbi's Manual is like a minister's handbook. You know, it has all of the liturgy for weddings, funerals, that kind of thing. When you see a clergy person with the little book, that's the manual. And I followed the history. The early Rabbi's Manuals and the early Reform prayer books identified the clergy person as reverend. In fact, of course. In fact, at that time, we're talking the 1890s, 1880s, rabbis wore a clerical collar. So the idea of Reform Judaism, I'm going down a rabbi hole, forgive me. The premise of Reform Judaism was to be a Judaism for modernity, an Americanism, if you will. And what did those immigrant Jews want to do was be like the neighbors down the street. Who were the neighbors down the street? The Protestants. So you're not far off, just a little untimely, but not far off. No, not at all. I've been called much worse, believe me. So I was asked to come this morning and speak with you all about, as you said, Hanukkah, because Hanukkah's first night is on December 25th this year. And the first question you all are going to say is, well, why does it jump around? Or you never thought of that, did you?
No, I didn't.
So I actually, just to forewarn you, I do have a huge handout that we will work through. I'm one that likes paper, so we do have actual structured conversation, but as you'll learn, I go down these rabbit holes a little bit. The Hebrew calendar is based upon Torah, on the first 5 books. And there are passages in Exodus, Leviticus, and in Deuteronomy which describe the Hebrew calendar. The Hebrew calendar is based on what's called a luna-solar calendar. So our Gregorian calendar, our American calendar, if you want to call it that, is a solar calendar. And it is fixed according to the cycle of the sun. The Hebrew calendar is based upon the lunar calendar, the moon. Our holidays and our days begin at sundown and end at sundown, which is why the Sabbath, or Shabbat as we call it, begins Friday night at sundown and ends Saturday night at sundown. And that actually goes back to that creation narrative, first chapter of Genesis. There was evening and there was morning the first day. It establishes evening first and then morning. So that's where that comes from. So the Hebrew calendar, I'm going really far down a rabbit hole. The Hebrew calendar actually has 4 New Years. What? 4 New Years. There is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, the holiday of the Jewish New Year, which happens to fall on the first of the month of Tishrei. And according to the text in Torah, it is the first day of the 7th month. Wait a minute. The New Year is on the 7th month? Yes, that is the spiritual New Year. Then we also have the calendar New Year, which is pinned closely to Passover. We also have an agricultural New Year, which comes January, February, called Tu B'Shvat, and that is when I like to call it, it's a combination between Arbor Day and Groundhog Day. And I'll tell you why. Tu B'Shvat is a holiday of the trees. It's when the rabbis of the Talmud teach us that the sap begins to awaken in the trees and spring is coming. So, multiple New Years. Not very different from what we in America have, because of course, there's our calendar New Year. There's our tax New Year. There's the New Year of, when the kids go back to school. All of these different New Years. So we all function on different calendars and different cycles. Excuse me, little frog. So Hanukkah, like all of our holidays, bounces and fluctuates according to the 28-day cycle of the month. So wait a minute. If a month in the Hebrew calendar is 28 days, and our calendars have 30, 31, 28, occasionally 29, you can see how they fall out of sync. So every few years we have a leap month, the second month of Adar, which kicks everything back into alignment. That hinge pin, as I told you, is it hinge or is it hitch? That lynch pin, that's what it is, thank you. That lynch pin is Passover. And that usually always falls closely related to your Easter. So as these 28-day months progress, it will cause our years to get shorter and shorter, which then the holy days happen as they say, oh, they're early this year, or they're late this year. No, they're right on time. They're just different than our Gregorian calendar. So about 10 or 12 years ago, we had Hanukkah fall on Thanksgiving. Oh. And that was the only time, that's the earliest I've ever seen Hanukkah fall. And this is the latest I've seen Hanukkah fall in quite a while, which is, oh, thank you, which is falling in the end of December. So that kind of explains our calendar. It's all about the linchpin of Passover. So that gets us to our holidays. But let me explain something as well. Hanukkah is an insignificant holiday. No, seriously. It's very insignificant. Our holidays, we have, according to Torah, we have our high holy days. Those are the big ones. Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, which happens 10 days later, which is the Day of Atonement. Those are the big ones. And we just had those October this year. And then we have the three festivals, the pilgrimage festivals, the Shlosh Regalim, as we call them. And those are Sukkot, which is the festival of booths, the autumn harvest festival. Shavuot, also known as Pentecost, which is the spring harvest festival, the festival of weeks. And Passover, which is the festival of freedom, emancipation, if you will. So those are the significant festivals. So we've got the big high holy days, the significant festivals, and then there's a series of, my microphone's falling off, a series of minor festivals. One is what I mentioned before, Tu B'Shvat, which is that agricultural new year, the festival of the trees. Another one is a festival called Purim, which is where we recite or read the book of Esther and wear costumes, and there's a little bit of debauchery. That's another one of the minor festivals. And there are several other ones, including Hanukkah. So why is Hanukkah of significance here in America? Right. That's exactly right. In fact, Hanukkah is not even a gift-giving holiday. Purim, that Esther-attached holiday, is the holiday of gift-giving. So again, Americanisms, trying to be like our neighbors down the street, that's where the significance of Hanukkah happens in Judaism. It's really a minor festival. So that gets us to Hanukkah. Any questions? No, I'm being serious. I mean, from what I've covered and getting us there, is there a second mic? I can walk. I'd be honored to walk.
Okay. Does the Jewish household have a Christmas tree? Or?
No. No-ish. I'll explain that in just a moment.
It's a kind of a insignificant, maybe not so, question is,
He's working on it.
are we on? Yes, sir. Okay. I know that a lot of the Jewish holidays have presents, gifts. The children get little puzzles to solve, or at least this is what we got from a previous presentation back in Texas. Is this similar to what we would call our Christmas presents? Is it the same concept?
That's a great question. So, as I mentioned a moment ago, Hanukkah is traditionally not a gift-giving holiday in the sense of, you know, a new car, the new $12 70-inch TV that they're selling. I don't know how that happens. They're so cheap now. Hanukkah is not about gift-giving in that way. Purim is about gift-giving in that there's something called mishloach manot, which are gifts to the poor, or you might get, as you said, little trinkets, little gifts to children. What we do traditionally give on Hanukkah would be dreidels, which are spinning tops. And it's a little gambling game that we teach our kids how to play, which is fabulous. But there is not traditionally in Judaism a gift holiday like you would have Christmas. So back to the Christmas tree question. Was that your question? Yeah. And this is actually a very good segue or tie-in. Traditionally, no, we would not have a Christmas tree. A Christmas tree is, well, I think it's in its name. It is a Christmas tree, but as all of you know, a Christmas tree comes out of Germany, if I'm not mistaken, correct? And it was actually more attached to a festival of lights, which I never understood how you'd hang candles on a tree, but we won't get into that.
Those Germans.
It was interesting, yeah. But first of all, I will tell you, my mother of blessed memory would tell me that when she was growing up in small-town Indiana, where she was one of very few Jewish children, her parents, my grandparents, had a Christmas tree because that's what the neighbors had. And my grandfather was a retailer, had a ladies' ready-to-wear dress shop for 40 years, and he was the unofficial mayor of the town. He'd walk down the town, and everybody knew him, right? So, of course, he had Christmas decorations in his shop, and they had a tree in the house until one day my aunt of blessed memory came home after going to Sunday school and realized, well, we're Jewish. Why do we have a tree? And I'm told the very next day the tree was on the curb. That being said, almost 55% of... Is my microphone okay? I feel like it's fallen down. There it is. 55% of Jewish households, at least in liberal Judaism, are interfaith. So it's not uncommon for there to be a Christmas tree in a Jewish home. Uh-oh. Where'd my microphone go?
And Rabbi, if you would rather use that hand mic and not have that lavalier bother, you can take it.
Well, I'm working with it. There we go.
Okay, I grew up in Kansas City. Mm-hmm. And one of my dear friends always had a Hanukkah bush. Mm-hmm. And it was gorgeous. Mm-hmm. It was in their front window mm-hmm. with the white and blue mm-hmm. on it. Mm-hmm. And that was just normal to us. Mm-hmm. We had a Christmas tree. They had a Hanukkah bush.
Mm-hmm. Oh, are you chasing me? Okay. So a Hanukkah bush. It's funny you mentioned that, and thank you. That's actually not a thing. I mean, it has become a thing. It is a Jewish cultural response to Christmas. Like being like your neighbors, right? So, yeah. My wife likes to run blue and white lights around the house. We don't typically decorate the outside of the house, but for Hanukkah, she likes to do little unimpressive decorations. So, no. So let's be honest. Christmas is gorgeous, and it's colorful, and it has wonderful smells and sounds and all of those incredible things. Even the food just looks amazing for Christmas. Judaism, food is brown, latkes, applesauce, but it's brown, and you get these beautiful Christmas cookies and then brown. It's just the nature of what it is. And yeah, we try culturally to keep up with the Joneses, and the Joneses happen to not be Jewish next door. Does that make sense? So that's where Christmas or a Hanukkah bush comes from and those types of things. The tradition, and we'll get to it, I hope, is, and this goes back to the tree and the lights and those things, the tradition is to publicize the miracle. So we light a Hanukkah, a menorah, and put it in the window of the home so that people on the street can see the miracle of the light. And that's why I said it's a wonderful segue. So we might have blue and white lights and gifts and things throughout the house inside, but we don't do lights on the outside of the house, but you will see a menorah. It's electric. I don't put a burning candle in the window. But you'll see an electric menorah in our front window with each night lit up accordingly. And that leads me to this time of year. It's the darkest time of the year. Is anyone else going a little wacky right now when at 5:30 it feels like it's midnight? Yeah. It's the shortest days, the darkest time of the year, and this is not a new thing. This goes back for centuries, millennia, where that, seasonal depression and that darkest time of the year hits us all pretty hard. So there are, I read a study, or I think honestly it was a Wikipedia article, about festivals of lights. There are some 30 different cultural or religious festivals of light throughout history and throughout our cultures, because we're all trying to bring light into this darkest time of the year. So that is a foundation to Christmas, with the lights and the tree and all of the wonderful pieces that go with it. And that's also why we have the miracle of the lights in Hanukkah. At least one of the many reasons. This leads me to our tale. But before I hand this out, and actually I need a helper. We'll help. Thank you. What do you all, help me to understand what you all know about Hanukkah? Rededication of the temple. Whatever that means. We'll get to that. What else might you know? What do we know about Hanukkah? So many days. How many days?
I'm going to guess 10.
8 nights. You were close, like hand grenades close, yeah. 8 nights, and we'll talk about why 8 nights. What else do we know about Hanukkah?
I have a question.
Okay. Or I'll just repeat it.
Okay. I've heard 2 things on lighting the candles.
Yes.
One is that they start with 8 and then put one out every night.
Or light one less, yes.
Light one less.
Okay.
Because the oil would actually do it, and then lighting one each night till they get to 8.
Okay, so Cindy asked about the process of lighting the candles for Hanukkah. She heard that there are 2 different approaches. One is starting on the first night with all of the candles lit, and then each night consecutively light one less. Or start with one and each night add one more. That's very rabbinic of you, because that's actually a discussion that goes back to the Talmud, somewhere around the year 400 or 500. 2 different rabbis, Hillel and Shammai, were, as they always argued. Frankly, Hillel and Shammai argue on many things. Hillel always wins, but we still see the argument, because the argument is as important as the outcome. So Shammai said you start with all 8 candles and the 9th helper candle, because you want to show the diminishment of the sacredness throughout the week. And Hillel said you begin with one and add another each night, because you want to sustain the holiness throughout the week. And Hillel won. So That was a good one. You were digging deep for me. Thank you. Any other question before I dive into the text? Yes.
The Maccabees.
Yes.
And the 8 days that the wine, or the oil.
Yes.
Is what?
What you were told? The Maccabees and the oil lasting 8 days is what you were told. Harvest festival. So Sukkot. Sukkot is an autumn harvest festival. It's a wacky idea, agriculturally based. I say wacky because we are charged with building a booth, a hut, outside, in the elements, with holes in the roof so you can see the stars. And then we are to pull together a series of ritual items of palm, willow, and myrtle, which makes a long frond-like item that we shake, holding a citrus, a lemon-like fruit called an etrog. And we're supposed to shake it in all directions and say a blessing. And it's a rain dance, because this is the autumn festival, and we're heading into the winter months. If we don't get rain, we won't have a spring harvest. The summer months in Israel, it does not rain. It does not rain from Passover until Sukkot. So at this point, it's very practical. You're praying for rain. God, give us rain so we can eat. So here is the autumn festival. I say it's wacky because you're supposed to go outside into a booth with holes in the roof and pray for rain. But actually what we do is we have worship outside. We have plenty of meals with our family and friends and in the sukkah. It's a different thing now. But at the time it was agricultural. So at the time in 2nd Maccabees on the 25th of Kislev, that is 2 months after the 24th roughly of Tishrei, when we should have had Sukkot, but there was an invasion going on, and they were not able to celebrate Sukkot. So they reestablished the temple, and they said, we still need to celebrate Sukkot. We need to say those psalms of praise. It's called Hallel. You've heard the word hallelujah? Praise Yah, praise God. Hallel, psalms of praise. We still need to make these psalms of praise and ask God for rain, or we won't eat. So that's how that first festival of Hanukkah occurred, and that's why it's 8 days, because the festival of Sukkot is an 8-day festival. So it was just a later scheduled harvest festival that then we threw some lights in there and it became more festive, and they said, let's do this every year. Okay. The source still omits the jar of oil. Instead, it unravels part of the mystery for us. Now we can understand what happened that first Hanukkah 2,000 years ago. The festival of Sukkot was once probably the most important holiday in the Jewish year, especially for Jewish farmers. In Jewish sources, it's called Hechag, the holiday, the festival. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur were not pilgrimage festivals and attained the importance they now have only after destruction of the Second Temple. Second Temple is when that cultic religion of offering sacrifice, bringing your lamb, bringing your first fruits to the temple, the Kohanim, the priests would throw your stuff on the barbecue. All that wonderful smoke would go up to God. Wonderful, sweet-smelling roasted meats. Everybody would feast, and that's how God was worshipped. When the temple was destroyed in the year 70, we went from a cultic Judaism to what became known as Rabbinic Judaism, a new religion based upon those ancient or those old cultic practices. We're talking about the year 70. What else was happening in your faith around the year 70? Say 30-something years earlier. Just don't give me
Well, persecution of the Christians had started.
Okay. Easter. Okay. Did somebody happen to die and was resurrected? Somewhere around 35? Come on, people. Right. So, I talk about the Talmud being written in the year 500-ish. Before the Talmud, there was an earlier rabbinic text known as the Mishnah, which was finally written down somewhere around the year 200. The Mishnah was basically a series of rabbis going, okay, we no longer have temple sacrifice. We no longer sacrifice animals. We no longer have the temple to do that. So we have our regional or our local synagogue, Greek word synagogia, where we come together to offer song and prayer to worship God. How do we do that? And that's what this Mishnah does, is it lays out in a world where everything is upside down now, everything we knew for centuries is gone. So how do we do it? It's a user's manual, basically. About that same time, there was another series of books in your tradition being written known as the Gospels. So two parallel traditions developing at the same time. That's. I just want to make that kind of clear. Where was I? On Sukkot, vast numbers of Jews traveled to Jerusalem to give thanks to God for the crops they had just harvested, but they were always more concerned about the future than the past, about next year's crops, the grains and fruits that would sustain them for another year. On Sukkot, the most important prayer, the prayer for rain, Tefillat Geshem, rain to soften the sun-baked soil so it could be plowed and prepared for planting of seeds, rain to help the seeds germinate, take root, grow during the mild winters. They hoped the rains would taper off in the spring when the grains were ripe for harvest. Without rain, they were lost. So they still had to get Sukkot in because they were believers, right? When the Maccabees completed the purification of the temple, they were faced with a problem. A few months before, in Tishrei, they had been unable to pray for rain in the temple at Sukkot. You know what, I'm going to skip ahead. I think I've covered this. But if you notice, this discussion is from Mishnah Sukkot. I mentioned the Mishnah earlier. So this is actually a discussion of the how-to after the second temple in the year 70 was destroyed. So how about a reader for the next paragraph? Who's my reader? Who's my reader? Brenda, thank you. I'm in the middle of page 3 for those who've gotten lost.
The first 8-day celebration of the Maccabees was a belated Sukkot celebration. The following year, the new festival of Hanukkah borrowed some of the rituals of Sukkot from the first celebration. The 8 days, the recital of the Hallel
Psalms. Yep.
The lights brightly glowing eventually in every home.
That's lovely. Thank you. The name of the festival. What was this new festival called? And this is going to sound reminiscent of what somebody mentioned earlier. Second Maccabees begins with a letter dated back to 124 before the Common Era to the Jews of Egypt, inviting them to join in observing the new festival of Sukkot in Kislev. There's nothing sexy about that title. There's terrible marketing going on there. Festival of Sukkot in Kislev. From the Jews of Jerusalem and Judea to our brothers in Egypt, Shalom. May God bless you. The Jews of may God bless you. And now we ask you to celebrate Sukkot in the month of Kislev. Part of me says that's a crazy idea because we would have just celebrated Sukkot 8 weeks before.
Get confused.
Again, this is marketing, right? There follows another letter to the Jews of Egypt, purported to be from Judah the Maccabee himself, written in 164 after the victory, but before the first anniversary of the rededication of the temple. Since we are about to celebrate the purification of the temple on the 25th of Kislev, we thought it proper to inform you that you may celebrate this Sukkot in Kislev. Everything's a process, isn't it? And it always takes committees, apparently. Both of these letters indicate that for at least 40 years, the new festival was called Sukkot in Kislev, which supports the story in 2 Maccabees 10 that the first 8-day celebration was indeed a delayed Sukkot. And now, we now know why Hanukkah lasts for 8 days, why Hallel Psalms are recited, and why lights are kindled, still missing that little jar of oil. Right?
Where's the oil?
Where's the oil? So Megillat Ta'anit, A Megillah is a scroll. Megillat Esther is the scroll of Esther that we read for Purim. So Megillat Ta'anit, the scroll of days. This is a text that talks about how to celebrate holidays. More user manual stuff. Written sometime during the 1st century, 200 years after the purification of the temple. All the holidays on this, 200 years later. So, what year is this, 2024? So, it would be like discussing and celebrating an event that happened in the 1820s, 1830s. None of us were around. Our great-great-grandparents, maybe. So there is a connection and traditions that might have been handed down in the home, but it's nothing incredibly relevant to our story today. I'm trying to make this relevant in our understanding. All the holidays on this list, most of which commemorate Maccabean victories, have disappeared except for 2, Hanukkah and Purim. So half of our holidays throughout the year, we follow a very simple theme. We were persecuted, we persevered, let's eat. Hanukkah, we were persecuted, the temple was destroyed, we persevered, we won, and now let's eat some latkes. The story of Passover. We were persecuted in Egypt 400 years. We were freed through the Red Sea. Let's eat some really bad, flat matzah. I told you, the food's terrible. So, the story of Esther. We were persecuted. We had to hide our Jewishness because the evil man Haman was trying to hang us by the gallows. We persevered. Esther won the affection of the king. Let's eat. On that one, we eat little pastries in the shape of a triangle known as a Hamantaschen, which is, a taschen in German is a pocket, and Haman is from that bad guy Haman. If you remember in the story of Esther, Haman's ears are chopped off. So it's supposed to look like Haman's ears, but it's filled with jellies or jams or poppy. We tell the kids that it looks like his triangular hat, but that's a different story. So we were persecuted, we persevered, let's eat. All the holidays except for 2 disappeared, Hanukkah and Purim. On the 25th day of Kislev, Hanukkah begins 8 days. Mourning, M-O-U-R-N, mourning is forbidden. On these festivals, we are commanded to rejoice, to celebrate. Just as on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, we are charged to celebrate and rejoice. So mourning practices are suspended, which I know for the logical thinker of the 21st century, we've experienced a loss. Our loved one is gone, but here's a holiday, so don't mourn them on this day. It doesn't make it, it's counterintuitive. But what it is we are supposed to place the joy, at the center of our hearts. You know what? We're going to try it a different way for now. I'm fighting this mic. I'll just use this one. There we go. So in the middle of page 4, how about a reader from this end of the room? Who would like to be my reader here? Wow, you all are like teenagers, high school kids. I'm going to slide right across you here.
Am I starting here with this word of antiquities? Okay. Antiquities of the Jews was completed by Josephus around 94 CE, 258 years after the purification of the temple. In this history of the Jewish people, he writes, "So much pleasure did the Jews find in the renewal of their customs and in unexpectedly obtaining the right to conduct their own service after so long a time that they made a law that their descendants should celebrate the restoration of this temple service for 8 days. And from that time to the present, we observe this festival, which we call the Festival of Lights, given his name to it, I think, from the fact that the right to worship appeared to us at a time when we hardly dared hope for it. Antiquities 12, okay, volume 7, page 169.
I'll keep going. Mike, I'll jump in. I'll jump in. So Josephus Flavius, one of the earliest writers of Jewish history. He wrote The Jewish War, he wrote Antiquities of the Jews, and it is as much as an historical account can be done, like any other history, who writes the history? The victors, the winners, right. Josephus is not sure why the festival is called Lights. Unclear about its exact original nature, but also clearly omits any story about the little jar of oil. So there are two prayers as part of our tradition for Hanukkah, just as there are always liturgical insertions for every holiday. The first insertion we have is called Al HaNisim, which literally translates to upon the miracles. It declares the miracle of Hanukkah was God's enabling the weak, outnumbered righteous to prevail over their powerful evil enemy. And then, of course, Hanerot Hallelu. You all recognize Hallelu from what word? Hallelujah. So, praise. Hanerot. Hanerot means the lights. It affirms God's wonder performed in delivering our ancestors. So, again, neither of these prayers contains the mention of the little jar of oil. The miracle for all of these sources is the unexpected victory. So that's interesting. How are we doing on time, by the way? 8 minutes, and we haven't gotten to the oil yet? So let's skip the haircut and the bath. You can read that at home. Let's jump into the middle of page 6. So remember, I mentioned the Talmud. Somewhere around the year 200, the Mishnah was written, and then the rabbis of those next generations discussed the Mishnah, came up with their own commentary, and that became known as the Gemara. The Mishnah and the Gemara together becomes the Talmud. And you hear people talk about the Talmud and the rabbis of the Talmud. So that's around the year 500 or so. And Tractate Shabbat. It's a volume in the Talmud called Shabbat. What do you think it's about? About what? The Sabbath. This is not a trick question. It's about Shabbat. It's about the Sabbath. And in the beginning of the holiday of Shabbat, the weekly practice, we begin by lighting 2 separate candles and saying a blessing. And that brings in the holiday. So buried deep within this discussion about lighting Shabbat candles, we come to this little discussion about lighting Hanukkah candles. Because the rabbis, just like I always say, I go down a rabbit hole or a rabbi hole. The rabbis of the Talmud, it's not linear thinking. You start here and you may end here, but it's all over the place before you get there. So let's look at this real quick. Talmud Tractate Shabbat, page 21b. My Chanukah? Why Hanukkah? Our rabbis taught on the 25th day of Kislev begin the 8 days of Hanukkah on which eulogies or mourning and fasting are forbidden. For when the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled all the oil, and when the Hasmoneans prevailed and defeated them, they searched and found only 1 jar of oil with the official seal of the high priest, but which was only enough for 1 day's lighting. Yet a miracle occurred. They lit the lamp with it for 8 days. The following year, these days were decreed a festival with the recital of Hallel, psalms of praise and thanksgiving. So they found 1 cruse of sacred oil, which could be used in the act of ritual. That's what it means when it says it had the official seal of the high priest. They may have had other oil, but it wasn't sacred. It wasn't blessed, if you will. So this is around the year 500 when this oil thing comes out. We haven't heard anything about oil anywhere else, right? The real question of this text is, why do we celebrate Hanukkah? Rather, it's not why do we celebrate Hanukkah, but rather, on the authority of what miracle are we permitted to recite Hallel psalms on Hanukkah, a custom usually reserved for biblical God-ordained festivals. This is the rabbi's way of giving credence to a made-up holiday. I don't mean to say that sarcastically, well, a little bit, but most of our holidays are Torah-described and Torah-driven. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Pesach, all of those come right out of Torah, not Hanukkah. So how can we offer these special prayers on a holiday that's not God ordained? That's what's going on here. At the bottom of the page, the story was not accepted by Jews everywhere. In Palestine, 300 years later, with its long history of activism, another explanation was given, offering authority for the recital of Hallel. Basically, what we're saying here is this is just fancy marketing. If we can twist this just the right way, we can get the ritual the way we want it. That's what's happening. So Palestinian Midrash, Pesachta Rabbatai, which is a Midrash from around 847. So this is another 350 years after the Talmud. This is 900 years after actually Hanukkah happened. Why are lights kindled on Hanukkah? When the sons of the Hasmonean high priest were victorious over the kingdom of Greece, the men of Zion will fight the men of Greece. Upon entering the temple, they found 8 iron rods. That's an interesting number, isn't it? Which they thrust into the ground and kindled lights on them. Oh, now we've got a story of how the lights became. There was spears in the ground. And on what authority is Hallel recited? Because one states, the Lord God has given us light. The rabbis knew their Bible. And the rabbis could proof text and link ideas together in masterful ways. The author is not at all embarrassed by the activism of the Maccabees. In fact, he assumes that the Hasmoneans were originally high priests, which is not otherwise confirmed. For this Palestinian, writing 350 years after the Babylonian story of the oil was published, the authority for reciting Hallel is not the miracle of the oil, but the authority of God, as predicted by 2 verses from the Bible. So, who would like to be my reader for the next couple of paragraphs? Oh, thank you.
For the next 1,000 years or more, Jews in dire straits in different parts of the world usually chose the pacifist route to accommodation and survival. There were many notable exceptions. Now we are even becoming more aware of the many Jewish uprisings during the Holocaust. The state of Israel, this modern miracle, would not have been created if not for the return, beginning in the 19th century, of Zionism and its restoration of Maccabean activism as a valid Jewish option. In our own day, the activist, often in the pursuit of peace and pacifism, has rekindled the light of the Maccabees and restored the meaning and message of Hanukkah, that to achieve our goals and dreams, to bring freedom to the oppressed and hope to those who despair, we must be active pursuers of our cause. Our miracle will be achieved when the few, the weak, and just triumph.
So my big takeaway, personally, about Hanukkah has nothing to do with candles, nothing to do with oil. Well, it does in that, remember I said we were persecuted, we persevered, so let's eat. We like to fry things in oil. Potato pancakes. There's also a wonderful pastry donut-like treat called sufganiyot, which are jelly-filled donuts, basically. So I do like the oil in that way. But my big takeaway, is that my 1-minute marker? Thank you. My big takeaway is light. Not candles, but it's something that we all can share. Isaiah tells us to be a light unto the nations. And I think that's really this activist idea. That's the big takeaway, is that we are to be the voice for the downtrodden. We are to be the ones to bring light into the world, especially in these darkest of times. When I say darkest of times, I'm not here to bring in socio-political ideas, but let's be honest, it's a divided country that we're in right now, and it's sometimes a divided world. And I just on Friday night preached about this from the notion of looking back in history. We have time and again seen a divided world. 1865 divided the North and the South, brother against brother, Civil War. We were divided. 19 teens into 20s, women's suffragette, divided country. We could talk about Vietnam. We could talk, I mean, time and again, we see this division. Our role is to be the light. Be the one that's values-driven. Bring kindness into the world. This is my takeaway for all of you as we enter into this holiday season, whether we want to call it the festival season, the Christmas season, the December events, whatever we want to call it. Be the light, my friends. Thank you so much for having me once again.